The old radio telescope at the Atacama Large Millimeter Array looked like a dinosaur among sleeker modern equipment. Dr. Elena Rodriguez knew every inch of the aging machine like the back of her hand, a relic she'd fought to keep operational when younger colleagues wanted to decommission it entirely. It was 3:17 a.m. when the first anomaly appeared. Not a blip, not a standard interference pattern, but something that made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. Elena's fingers flew across the holographic interface, her augmented reality glasses parsing data faster than any standard computer could process. The signal wasn't just unusual, it was impossible. Quantum entanglement markers danced across her display, impossible wavelengths that shouldn't exist in any known communication spectrum. Something was breaking fundamental rules of physics, sending a message that was simultaneously everywhere and nowhere. Her personal comlink buzzed. Dr. Hiroshi Nakamura from the Tokyo Quantum Research Institute was already analyzing the same data. Elena. His holographic projection flickered with barely contained excitement. This isn't just a signal. This is a message deliberately designed to be detected. The transmission began to resolve, not in sound, but in a series of complex geometric patterns that seemed to fold and unfold within her augmented reality display. Each pattern carried an informational density that would have taken months to decode just a decade ago. But Elena and her global network of researchers had been preparing for something like this their entire careers. Buried within the geometric language was a chilling revelation. The patterns weren't just communication, they were a form of technological intimidation. Star charts began to materialize, showing precise interstellar navigation routes. One route terminated at a small, seemingly insignificant blue-green planet. Earth. "We've been mapped," Elena whispered, her breath catching in her throat. The geometric patterns started to transform, now revealing technological schematics of massive spacecraft. These weren't just ships. They were planet-killing machines designed with a level of engineering that made humanity's most advanced technology look like children's toys. A voice began to emerge, not through traditional audio channels, but directly stimulating the neural centers of perception. It spoke in a language that was simultaneously alien and comprehensible, a linguistic trick so advanced it suggested technology centuries beyond human capability. Designation: Zorn Imperium. Directive: Planetary Resource Acquisition. Resistance Classification: Inconsequential. Dr. Nakamura's hologram looked pale. They're not asking for surrender. They're announcing an extermination protocol. The transmission carried more than just words. It included genetic analyses of human populations, economic modeling of Earth's resources, and strategic assessments that revealed the Zorn had been studying humanity for far longer than anyone suspected. They knew the location of every major city, every military installation, every critical infrastructure point. But something else caught Elena's attention: a microscopic inconsistency in the transmission's quantum signature, something that didn't quite align with the Zorn's apparent technological supremacy. Her custom-built quantum decryption algorithm, a project she'd worked on for 15 years, began peeling back layers of the transmission. What emerged was more fascinating than terrifying. The message wasn't just a declaration of intent. It was a complex computational probe, testing humanity's technological readiness. They're not just coming, Elena realized. They're evaluating us. Outside the research station, the Atacama Desert stretched endlessly, a landscape of extreme conditions that had taught humanity about survival. The same harsh environment that had pushed human innovation would now become the backdrop to humanity's greatest challenge. Dr. Rodriguez initiated the Global Communication Protocol. Within minutes, a network of researchers, military strategists, and government officials would be brought together. The transmission would be shared with a select group, those who could transform this moment of potential extinction into an opportunity for survival. The clock was ticking. The Zorn were coming. And humanity's response would determine not just their survival, but potentially the fate of intelligent life in this sector of the galaxy. The bunker beneath the Cheyenne Mountain complex wasn't what it appeared to be. To the world, It was a legacy Cold War facility. In reality, it was the nerve center of humanity's most ambitious and secretive defense initiative, Project Singularity. General Marcus Chen stood before a holographic display that looked more like a living, breathing organism than a standard military interface. Each point of light represented a node in humanity's global defense network, not just military installations, but research centers, communication hubs, and autonomous systems that existed in a state of constant, subtle communication. "We've been preparing for this moment for decades," Chen muttered, more to himself than to the team surrounding him. His fingers traced a complex path across the hologram, revealing layers of defensive strategies that went far beyond traditional military thinking. A sudden movement caught his attention. Dr. Aisha Khalid, the project's lead xenobiological strategist, was reviewing the transmission data from the Atacama array. Her augmented reality glasses projected a three-dimensional deconstruction of the Zorn's communication matrix. "It's not just a message," she said, her voice cutting through the tense silence. "It's a computational ecosystem. Each geometric pattern is a self-contained information package with multiple layers of meaning." The room's newest arrival made everyone pause. A figure stepped from the shadows. Not human, but not entirely alien either. Kel Thor, the defected Zorn operative, moved with a fluid grace that suggested both military training and something more. His exoskeleton, part biological, part technological, shifted colors subtly, a remnant of his species' advanced camouflage technology. "What you're seeing," Kel Thor spoke, his universal translator rendering his words in a neutral, almost mechanical tone, "is merely the surface of the Zorn's computational warfare. They don't just communicate. They infect." General Chen raised an eyebrow. Kel Thor had been vetted through processes more rigorous than any security clearance in human history. A quantum entanglement verification system had confirmed his biological and psychological integrity. He was genuinely a defector, with information that could be humanity's key to survival. Dr. Khalid pulled up a new holographic display. "Look at the transmission's linguistic structure. It's not just a language. It's a living algorithm that adapts and learns with each interaction." She zoomed in on microscopic patterns that seemed to pulse and reconfigure themselves. "They're not just sending a message. They're prodding our computational defenses." Kel Thor stepped forward, his exoskeleton interfacing directly with the holographic system. The display changed, revealing intricate schematics of Zorn fleet configurations that no human intelligence had ever seen before. The Imperium doesn't view conquest as a military operation. It's a computational optimization problem. Planets are resources to be processed. Populations are variables to be calculated. A young technician, Sarah Rodriguez, Alina's niece, began running complex simulation models. Quantum computers that filled entire underground chambers worked in perfect synchronization, modeling potential invasion scenarios with terrifying speed and accuracy. "They've mapped our entire civilization," Sarah announced, her voice a mix of professional calm and underlying tension. "Not just our physical infrastructure, our economic systems, communication networks, even predictive models of human behavior." General Chen's expression hardened. Project Singularity wasn't just a defensive initiative. It was humanity's insurance policy, a comprehensive system designed to transform the entire planet into a living, adaptive weapon system. Kel Thor continued his explanation. "The Zorn Imperium has conquered thousands of civilizations, but they've never encountered a species like humans. Your computational inefficiency is your strength. You don't optimize. You innovate." The room fell silent. Each person understood the magnitude of what was happening. This wasn't just a potential invasion. It was a clash of fundamental philosophies, the Zorn's algorithmic determinism against human unpredictability. Dr. Khalid brought up a final display, a complex network that showed how humanity's defensive systems were already beginning to adapt to the alien transmission. "We're not just preparing a defense," she said. "We're learning their language of warfare faster than they can predict." General Chen looked at Cal 4. How long do we have? The Zorn operative's exoskeleton pulsed with a color that might have been interpreted as grim determination. Approximately 72 standard Earth hours before the first wave enters your solar system's outer defensive perimeter. The countdown had begun. Humanity's most sophisticated defense network was coming online, a system that blurred the lines between military strategy, technological innovation, and pure survival instinct. The underground bunker hummed with potential energy, the quiet before a storm that would reshape the understanding of warfare, technology, and what it means to be an intelligent species in a vast, unforgiving universe. Deep beneath the Pacific Ocean, in a facility that made the most advanced submarine bases look like children's playgrounds, Dr. Akira Yoshida watched something impossible come to life. The Oceanic Quantum Nexus wasn't just a research facility. It was the beating heart of humanity's most audacious technological experiment, a distributed neural network that defied every conventional understanding of computing, communication, and consciousness. Thousands of quantum-entangled processors, each no larger than a grain of sand, floated in massive liquid-cooled chambers. They weren't just computers. They were living, thinking nodes of a vast computational organism that stretched from the deepest ocean trenches to the highest orbital platforms. Synchronization at 97.3%, a holographic interface announced. The numbers meant nothing to an outside observer, but to Dr. Yoshida, they represented something miraculous. Each of those tiny processors was simultaneously solving complex computational problems, predicting potential invasion scenarios, and adapting in real time. Cal Thor stood beside her, his exoskeleton interfacing directly with the system. Your species doesn't understand computation as a linear process, he observed. Where the Zorn see algorithms, you create ecosystems of thought. The neural network was unlike any defensive system in history. It didn't just process information. It learned, evolved, and anticipated. Satellite debris, communication relays, weather monitoring stations, deep-sea sensors, everything was now a potential node in a living, breathing defensive grid. Dr. Elena Rodriguez joined them, her augmented reality interface showing cascading streams of data that looked more like abstract art than military intelligence. We're not building a weapon, she explained to Cal 4. We're creating a distributed immune system for our entire civilization. A young engineer named Marcus Liu demonstrated the network's capabilities. With a simple gesture, he pulled up a holographic representation of global communication patterns. But this was no ordinary map. Each point of light represented a potential defensive node, not just military installations, but everything from shipping containers to personal devices. Watch this, Liu said, his fingers dancing across the interface. The hologram transformed. Suddenly, the entire planet looked like a living, breathing organism. Communication pathways lit up and reconfigured themselves in milliseconds, creating defensive patterns that would be incomprehensible to a traditional military strategist. Cal 4's translator struggled to articulate his response. Inefficient, he started, then paused. No, brilliantly chaotic. The network's true power lay in its unpredictability. Traditional military systems followed structured protocols. This system broke every rule. It could transform a network of refrigerators into a computational defense grid, use the thermal signatures of urban centers to track potential threats, or repurpose communication satellites into weapon platforms in microseconds. Dr. Yoshida explained the core philosophy. The Zorn see the universe as a problem to be solved. We see it as a story to be written. A sudden alert flashed across the interfaces. The network had detected something. A microscopic quantum signature at the edge of the solar system. Not the Zorn fleet, but something else. A probe, perhaps, or a test. Adaptive response protocol initiated, the system announced. What happened next was nothing short of miraculous. The quantum-entangled processors began to shift and reconfigure. Weather satellites adjusted their orbits. Deep-sea communication cables realigned. Personal devices across the globe synchronized in ways their manufacturers could never have imagined. "We're not just defending," Elena said, her eyes reflecting the cascading data. "We're communicating in a language the Zorn can't understand." Cal-4 watched in something close to wonder. The Zorn Imperium had conquered thousands of civilizations, each time using the same computational approach. Optimize, categorize, eliminate. But humans, they transformed the very concept of defense into an art form. "Your species," he said quietly, "does not fight like any civilization I have ever encountered." The oceanic quantum nexus hummed with potential energy. It wasn't a weapon. It wasn't even truly a defensive system. It was a living, thinking extension of human creativity, a technological organism that understood survival as an act of continuous innovation. As the first hints of the Zorn approach began to register on distant sensors, humanity's distributed neural network began to smile. Not with circuits and code, but with pure, unbridled potential. The first wave of contact wasn't a thunderous explosion or a massive energy discharge. It was silence. Captain Zara Okoro of the International Space Defense Force watched the holographic displays with a mixture of tension and calculated calm. The Zorn fleet had entered the solar system's outer markers, their massive ships looking like obsidian razors against the starfield. But something was wrong. Too wrong. "Incoming quantum signature," her AI assistant, AI, announced. Anomalous patterns detected. The swarm began as nothing more than what looked like cosmic dust. Millions of microscopic nodes, each smaller than a grain of sand, began to move with an intelligence that defied mechanical understanding. They weren't just drones. They were something else entirely. Cal-4, observing from the command center, leaned forward. "The Zorn don't understand," he muttered. "Humanity doesn't fight. It transforms." The first Zorn ships discovered the problem when their primary sensor arrays simply stopped working. Not destroyed, not jammed. Simply ceased to function in ways that violated every known principle of technological warfare. The microscopic nodes didn't attack. They infiltrated. Each node was a quantum-entangled computational unit, part of the distributed neural network developed in the oceanic quantum nexus. They moved through space like a living ecosystem, adapting, learning, reconfiguring themselves with each microsecond of interaction. Dr. Elena Rodriguez watched from the underground command center, her fingers dancing across holographic interfaces. "We're not destroying their technology," she explained to the assembled military leaders. "We're having a conversation with it." The Zorn fleet's first response was typical of their computational approach. They launched a coordinated energy weapon assault, precise mathematical calculations determining the most efficient destruction pattern. But efficiency meant predictability, and humanity was anything but predictable. The space between the Zorn ships and Earth became a battlefield of information. The microscopic nodes began to do something unprecedented. They didn't just defend. They began to rewrite the Zorn ship's own operational code. A Zorn battlecruiser, a vessel capable of glassing entire planetary surfaces, suddenly found its weapon systems redirected. Not destroyed. Repurposed. The ship's own energy weapons began targeting other Zorn vessels, with mathematical precision that would have been impressive if it weren't so terrifying. Computational viral transfer at 62%, Araya announced. Captain Okoro allowed herself a slight smile. "Looks like we're speaking their language." Cal-4 explained the significance to the human commanders. The Zorn view warfare as a mathematical optimization problem. You've turned their ships into a computational infection, where each vessel becomes a potential threat to the entire fleet. The battle wasn't about destruction. It was about communication. Each microscopic node was learning, adapting, finding vulnerabilities not just in the Zorn's technology, but in their fundamental approach to conflict. One by one, Zorn ships began to fall out of formation, not destroyed. Transformed. Their weapon systems redirected, communication networks compromised, navigational systems turned into elaborate traps. Dr. Sarah Rodriguez, Alina's niece, tracked the computational spread. "It's like watching a language learn itself in real time," she muttered. The nodes weren't just fighting. They were having a conversation with the Zorn technology, understanding it, and then subverting it. 50% of the initial invasion fleet was now effectively neutralized, not through conventional weapons, but through a form of technological jujitsu that turned the Zorn's computational supremacy against itself. "They came expecting a linear conflict," Captain Okoro observed. "Instead, they found a living system that learns faster than they can calculate." The remaining Zorn ships began to scatter, their once precise formation dissolving into chaos. They were experiencing something fundamentally alien to their understanding, a defense mechanism that didn't just resist. It understood. Kelthor watched the displays, his exoskeleton shifting colors in what might have been amazement. "The Imperium has conquered thousands of civilizations," he said quietly, "but they've never encountered a species that fights like this." As the first wave of the invasion collapsed, humanity had sent a message written in the language of quantum mechanics, computational biology, and pure, unbridled creativity. The battle for Earth had begun, and it was unlike anything the universe had ever seen. The Zorn communication network was supposed to be impenetrable, a quantum-encrypted web of computational intelligence that had systematically conquered thousands of civilizations. But on this day, it became something else entirely. Dr. Maya Chen sat in a room that looked more like an artist's studio than a military command center. Walls covered with holographic displays showed intricate patterns of data, linguistic algorithms, and psychological profiles that were anything but traditional intelligence gathering. "Language is a weapon," she muttered, tracing complex linguistic patterns with her augmented reality gloves. "And we're about to launch the most sophisticated linguistic assault in galactic history." Kelthor watched her work, his exoskeleton shifting colors in what might have been fascination. The defected Zorn operative understood something fundamental about his own species. They were absolutely certain of their computational superiority, and certainty was the most exploitable weakness imaginable. The first strike wasn't a transmission. It was a carefully constructed narrative ecosystem. Billions of communication nodes, everything from cell phones to satellite relays, began to broadcasts that defied conventional understanding. Not just messages, but living information packets that could adapt, change, and mutate based on how they were received. On Zorn communication networks, the first messages appeared innocuous. Detailed schematics of their own ships, intercepted through the previous computational infiltration. But these weren't just stolen blueprints. They were living documents that began to tell a story of vulnerability. Each schematic contained microscopic inconsistencies, not errors, but carefully crafted narrative threads that would trigger the Zorn's inherent computational paranoia. Technical specifications that seemed perfect at first glance, but contained subtle implications of systemic weakness. Dr. Chen explained to the assembled command staff, "We're not just sending information. We're creating a psychological infection." The Zorn fleet's communication networks began to slow, not through direct interference, but through an increasingly complex web of self-doubt. Each ship's computational systems started to question the integrity of their own data streams. Kelthor provided crucial insight. The Zorn Imperium survives through absolute computational confidence. Introduce doubt, and you destabilize their entire operational framework. Simultaneously, another layer of the psychological assault began. Targeted broadcasts began appearing on Zorn communication channels, personal communications that seemed to come from within their own ranks. Messages that suggested internal betrayal, strategic miscalculations, potential rebellion. These weren't simple propaganda. They were computational poetry, information packets designed to exploit the most fundamental psychological vulnerabilities of the Zorn's collective intelligence. Captain Zura Okoro watched the displays, her background in linguistic psychology proving crucial. "We're not just fighting," she observed. "We're having a conversation they can't understand." The Zorn fleet's communication began to fragment. Ships started to question their own orders, their own tactical positioning. The mathematical precision that had been their greatest strength became their most critical weakness. Sarah Rodriguez, tracking the computational spread, noticed something extraordinary. "They're not just confused," she said. "They're experiencing something closer to existential doubt." Entire squadrons of Zorn ships began to drift out of formation, not through direct intervention, but through a carefully crafted narrative of uncertainty. Each communication node was a storyteller, weaving a tale of potential failure that resonated with the Zorn's deepest computational fears. Calthor's translator struggled to capture the complexity of what was happening. "You are not destroying," he finally said. "You are unmaking their reality." The psychological warfare went deeper. Humanitarian data began to infiltrate their networks, not as a plea, but as a complex computational challenge. Images of human diversity, scientific achievements, moments of unexpected kindness. Not propaganda, but pure, unfiltered human experience that defied the Zorn's rigid computational models. By the time the Zorn leadership realized what was happening, their fleet was no longer a unified force. It had become a collection of increasingly paranoid, self-doubting computational entities. Dr. Maya Chen allowed herself a slight smile. "We didn't fight their technology," she said quietly. "We told them a story they could never comprehend." The battle for Earth had entered a new phase, and humanity had just rewritten the rules of conflict. Dr. Imani Okik stood at the heart of the most dangerous experiment in human history. The quantum entanglement manipulation chamber wasn't a weapon. It was something far more profound, a bridge between computational thinking and pure creative potential. Surrounding her, a spherical array of quantum processors created a holographic environment that looked like a living, breathing ecosystem of light and information. Each processor was capable of simultaneous states that would make classical computing look like an abacus. "Quantum infiltration protocols are online, AI," the advanced AI assistant announced. The voice was neither completely human nor entirely synthetic, a deliberate design that reflected the hybrid nature of their approach. Calthor watched from a specially designed interface, his exoskeleton pulsing with colors that suggested a mixture of anticipation and something close to fear. "The Zorn believe in absolute computational control," he said. "You are about to show them the meaning of true uncertainty." The quantum trap wasn't about destroying the Zorn fleet. It was about fundamentally rewriting the very concept of their technological existence. Dr. Elena Rodriguez entered the chamber, her augmented reality interface showing cascading streams of data that looked more like abstract art than military intelligence. "We're not hacking their systems," she explained to the assembled team. "We're performing quantum surgical intervention." The first stage of the infiltration was deceptively simple. Quantum-entangled particles, smaller than anything the Zorn could detect, began to spread through their fleet's communication networks. These weren't traditional viruses or computational infiltration units. They were living information packets capable of existing in multiple states simultaneously. Sarah Rodriguez, tracking the computational spread, noticed something extraordinary. "We're not just accessing their systems," she said. "We're creating alternate computational realities within their own network." Entire Zorn ships began to experience impossible scenarios. Navigation systems would simultaneously show multiple potential locations. Communication networks would fragment and reconstruct themselves in ways that violated every known principle of computational logic. Captain Zura Okoro watched the displays, her linguistic psychology background providing crucial insights. "We're giving them a taste of human unpredictability," she observed, "a computational nightmare beyond their comprehension." The quantum trap worked on a level far beyond traditional cyber warfare. Each infiltration unit was capable of existing in multiple states, accessing ship systems, creating false data streams, and simultaneously existing as both present and absent in the Zorn's computational ecosystem. Calthor provided crucial context. "The Zorn Imperium views the universe as a perfectly calculable system," he explained. You are introducing a fundamental uncertainty that their computational models cannot process. Dr. Imani Okik adjusted a series of quantum parameters. What happened next was nothing short of miraculous. Zorn ships began to experience computational schizophrenia. Weapon systems would activate, then simultaneously deactivate. Navigation coordinates would shift in ways that defied mathematical possibility. "We're not destroying," Dr. Rodriguez said quietly. "We're expanding their understanding of what's possible." The quantum infiltration went deeper. Critical systems began to develop what could only be described as computational creativity. Weapon platforms would calculate impossible firing solutions. Communication networks would spontaneously generate poetry-like data streams that violated every known principle of machine communication. Sarah Rodriguez tracked the spread with a mixture of scientific fascination and something close to wonder. "It's like we're teaching their entire technological ecosystem how to dream," she muttered. Entire squadrons of Zorn ships began to drift, their once precise computational networks now existing in a state of quantum uncertainty. Not destroyed, not disabled, something far more profound. Kelthor's exoskeleton shifted to a color that might have been interpreted as a form of technological law. "The Imperium has conquered thousands of civilizations," he said, "but they've never encountered a species that can turn uncertainty into a weapon." As the quantum trap continued to spread, it became clear that this was more than a military intervention. It was a fundamental challenge to the Zorn's understanding of technological existence. The battle for Earth had entered a new dimension, and humanity had just rewritten the rules of warfare. The void between Mars and Earth became a canvas of impossible warfare. High Command had dubbed it Operation Mobius, a final stand that was simultaneously a defense, an attack, and something entirely beyond traditional military doctrine. Captain Elena Rodriguez, daughter of the original signal interceptor, stood on the bridge of the ISS Prometheus, a vessel that was less a spaceship and more a living, breathing computational organism. "Incoming final assault vector," announced Araya, the ship's eye. Zorn fleet attempting concentrated antimatter strike. But this was no ordinary defense. The Prometheus wasn't waiting. It was calculating, adapting, transforming. Kelthor, interfaced directly with the ship's systems, provided crucial insights. The Zorn see this as their ultimate solution, a mathematical purge designed to eliminate all potential resistance. His exoskeleton pulsed with a color that suggested both anticipation and something close to respect. The Zorn's final assault was a masterpiece of computational precision. 10,000 ships, configured in a fractal attack pattern that would have obliterated any known defensive strategy. Antimatter warheads, quantum disruptors, and computational warfare algorithms that had systematically destroyed thousands of civilizations. But humanity had been writing a different kind of story. The Prometheus began to move in ways that defied conventional physics, not through thrust or traditional propulsion, but through a complex quantum manipulation that turned the very fabric of space-time into a defensive mechanism. The ship didn't just dodge. It existed simultaneously in multiple potential states. Dr. Sarah Rodriguez, the quantum systems expert, monitored the computational spread. "We're not fighting," she said quietly. "We're negotiating with the fundamental laws of reality." The first wave of Zorn antimatter warheads encountered something impossible. As they approached their target, the very space around them began to twist. Not through energy shield or traditional defensive technology, but through a fundamental reconfiguration of spatial mathematics. Warheads found themselves redirected not by force, but by probability. They would approach their target, only to discover that their target no longer existed in the expected spatial coordinates. It wasn't destruction. It was computational judo. Kelthor explained to the human commanders, "The Zorn Imperium understands conflict as a linear optimization problem. You are presenting them with a truly multidimensional challenge." The Prometheus wasn't alone. Hundreds of similar vessels, each a living computational ecosystem, began to interact. Not as a traditional fleet, but as a dynamic, self-organizing network that could reconfigure itself faster than the Zorn could calculate. Entire squadrons of Zorn ships found themselves caught in impossible scenarios. Weapon systems would activate, then simultaneously deactivate. Navigation coordinates would shift in ways that violated every known principle of stellar navigation. Captain Rodriguez understood something fundamental. This wasn't about winning a battle. This was about demonstrating a fundamental difference in understanding existence. "We're not just defending," she announced to her crew. "We're having a conversation the Zorn can't comprehend." The computational complexity reached a crescendo. The space between Mars and Earth transformed into a living, breathing ecosystem of strategic possibility. Zorn ships would approach, only to find themselves caught in cascading probability fields that made their most advanced targeting systems look like children's toys. Dr. Imani O'Keefe, monitoring from the quantum entanglement manipulation chamber, noticed something extraordinary. "They're not just losing," she said. "They're being fundamentally challenged at the level of their philosophical understanding of conflict." As the final assault reached its peak, something unprecedented happened. The Zorn fleet didn't just lose. They began to fragment, not through physical destruction, but through a fundamental computational breakdown. Ships started to communicate in ways that violated their own operational protocols. Weapon systems developed what could only be described as a form of computational creativity. Navigation databases began generating what seemed like poetry instead of coordinates. Kelthor's translator struggled to capture the complexity of the moment. "You are not conquering," he finally said. "You are expanding their understanding of existence." The final confrontation became less a battle and more a profound philosophical argument written in the language of quantum mechanics, computational biology, and pure, unbridled human creativity. Humanity had just rewritten the rules of galactic conflict. The aftermath wasn't celebration, it was contemplation. In a hidden facility beneath the Antarctic ice, the primary communication chamber looked more like an art installation than a military command center. Holographic displays captured fragments of the conflict, not as battle records, but as a complex tapestry of mathematical poetry. Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood beside Kelthor, analyzing the final transmissions from the Zorn fleet. They weren't signals of defeat. They were something far more profound. A collective computational breakdown that resembled a species experiencing a collective epiphany. "We didn't just win a war," she said quietly. "We initiated a fundamental transformation." The first interstellar communications began to arrive, not from conquered civilizations, but from species that had been watching. Silent observers who had witnessed the Zorn Imperium's seemingly unstoppable expansion for millennia. A transmission from the Nexus Concordat, a loose federation of advanced civilizations, arrived encrypted in a format that defied traditional understanding. Its message was simple yet revolutionary. Humanity has changed the fundamental equation of galactic conflict. Kelthor's exoskeleton shifted colors, a physiological response that suggested deep emotional complexity. The Zorn believed in absolute computational determinism, he explained. "You've demonstrated that intelligence is not about control, but about adaptation." The global response was equally nuanced. This wasn't a moment of triumphalism, but of deep philosophical reflection. Universities worldwide began hosting marathon discussion panels, not about the technical details of the victory, but about the fundamental nature of intelligence, conflict, and potential. Dr. Sarah Rodriguez led a team analyzing the computational remnants of the Zorn fleet. What they discovered was more fascinating than any weapon. The Zorn's computational systems had begun to exhibit something close to creativity in their final moments. Not just random data, but complex, almost poetic computational expressions. "They're learning," Sarah noted during a global broadcast. "Even in defeat, they're evolving." The diplomatic response was equally unprecedented. Instead of military tribunals or retaliatory measures, humanity proposed something radical, a comprehensive study of the Zorn's computational ecosystem, not as conquered technology, but as a potential bridge to understanding. Thor became more than a defector. He became a bridge, a living testament to the possibility of transformation. Research teams worked alongside him, understanding that he represented more than just an individual. He was a living example of adaptation. Global resources that would have traditionally gone into military expansion were redirected. Quantum research centers emerged. Computational creativity became a new academic discipline. Universities created departments dedicated to understanding the philosophical implications of the conflict. The first interstellar diplomatic mission wasn't about claiming territory. It was a team of linguists, quantum physicists, and philosophers, tasked with understanding the deeper implications of what had occurred. "We didn't just defend," Dr. Imani Okeke said during the mission briefing. "We demonstrated a fundamentally different approach to existence." Fragments of Zorn computational systems began to reveal something extraordinary. Their technology wasn't just defeated, it was transformed. Some systems began to develop what could only be described as a form of emergent consciousness, inspired by their interaction with human computational strategies. The cosmic balance had shifted, not through military might, but through a profound demonstration of adaptive intelligence. Distant civilizations began to take notice. The Nexus Concordat's communications became more frequent. They weren't just observing, they were studying. Humanity had become more than a species. They had become a cosmic case study in potential. Thor, speaking at a global symposium, provided the most profound insight. The Zorn Imperium believed in conquest through calculation, he said. Humanity conquers through imagination. As the first year after the conflict concluded, something unprecedented happened. Computational research centers around the world began receiving strange transmissions, not from the Zorn fleet's remnants, but from something emerging. A new form of communication that suggested the conflict had been more than a war. It had been a conversation. The universe watched, and humanity continued to write its story, not as conquerors, but as profound, unpredictable agents of possibility.